It's another Friday night. I'm Mike Leonard. Welcome to Friday Night Photoshop. Tonight we're going to be talking about layers, one of my favorite things, and understanding layers. I really think layers is one of the more liberating functions you'll ever learn in Photoshop just because it opens so many doors to things that you can do. So let's dive in and see some of those things and get a better understanding for layers. A lot of you have seen this before, and this is my layered sandwich, ham and cheese and tomato sandwich. And when we look at this, I call this an aerial view. We're looking straight down on this. All right. It's like if you were to go and make a sandwich, then take a picture of it from above. This is what we're looking at. Now, if I were to look at a side view of this, I'm going to hit F7, and this is what brings out layers. And I'll just expand this out. And hopefully you can all see this over here on the side. What this is the composition of what makes up this sandwich. Now, if you're familiar already with this aerial view, imagine if you were to tilt the camera sideways and look at it from the side. Now, what you'd see is on the very bottom would be the background, which is your table, right? Or your placemat. Then on that you would have a plate. And then most sandwiches, you're going to have bread on the bottom. I put in a bunch of ham. I put in some tomatoes, some cheese, mustard, and then I put the bread on the very top. So this is a side view, and this is an aerial view. So to bring out these layers, we hit F7. The other way to do that is to go up to Windows and then come down here to Layers. And you'll see the shortcut is right over here. By the way, anytime you see these little shortcuts over here on the side, those are what they are. So for layers, it's F7, or you can go and click here. So simply put, that's what layers are. Now, we have these little eyeballs next to each layer. And watch what happens if I shut off the eyeball. The layer's still there, but we just don't see it. We're just making that invisible. Now, here's one thing you really need to know about layers from the get-go, and I should have said this. Layers are hierarchical. So whatever is on top here will be on top over here. So just because we don't see much of the plate that's in here, doesn't mean the whole plate isn't there. And we'll see that as I go down. So I'll shut off the mustard. I put a lot of cheese on this sandwich. I put in some fresh tomatoes. And then I put in a lot of ham. And see, I'm just shutting these off one by one as I go down. Oh, look at that. There's the bread on the bottom of the sandwich, and the bread is on the plate. The plate is on the table, or tablecloth if you wanted to call it that, okay? So I could be kind of messy about this and just put the mustard on the table. Or how about mustard and tomatoes? Okay, I'll have a fine mess. But let's say if I would like to be a little better about this, and I'm going to put the plate there, and then I would like this on a sandwich, so I'll put in the bread. And I could just put the bread on the top now. Now it's no longer a ham and cheese sandwich, it's just a mustard and tomato sandwich. See what we're doing here? I'm just turning these on and off. And the other cool thing that I can do with this, let's put some cheese in here again, and let's put in some ham again. All right. Now you'll see that when I put this in, this is blocking the plate. And again, layers are hierarchical. Look at where plate is here on this list. Second from the bottom. Everything else is on top of the plate. So when you make a sandwich, if you put a piece of bread down on the plate, your plate doesn't disappear. It's still there. Remove the bread and you'll see the plate. Right? You're all with me there? Is this making sense? Now, I can move layers around. Let's turn on this mustard for a moment and watch what happens if I take this mustard layer. And by the way, you see how that's highlighted compared to all the rest? If I just click and hold this and drag this up, I can put the mustard on top of the bread. Now, that doesn't make sense. But we're in Photoshop now, right? I could even put the tomatoes on underneath the mustard right there with a piece of bread underneath it all. Or I could even say, well, let's just get rid of the bread. So you can see what we're doing here. Yeah, we're having fun with food, but the point is, hopefully you all understand that the layers are what's giving me the ability to move things around pretty nimbly, I'd say, here in this image. Now, there's lots of different kinds of layers. We've been working with images, but we have text layers, we have layer masks, we can do adjustment layers, we can create watermarks using layers, and we can even make templates, which can be kind of fun, and all using layers. So let's get out of this and let's talk about what we can do with layers. I've just come into Bridge and I'm going to open up these two images that I've got of some traffic. And I'd like to open these into layers. So I'll go to Tools, go to Photoshop, and I'm going to say Load Files into Photoshop Layers. This is a quick way to get a number of files all together into a bunch of layers. And here they are. Here's the top layer with that scene. Here's the bottom layer with that scene. Now, I would like to see both cars, but we'd have a little problem here because remember how I said one layer trumps the other one? The layer on top is always the one that you're going to see first over here. You might look at this and say, well, that other layer doesn't exist. Yes, it does. It's right here. It's just that it's under this one. Now, if I wanted to, I could take this bottom one and move it to the top, and there it is. But now we don't see the other vehicle over here. And let's say we'd like to see that vehicle. How can we make that work? Well, we've got different opacity modes here, such that if I move this down, I could do this, but now they both are like ghosts because we can see through them. You see, we can blend a layer here by using this opacity. And by the way, I'm using Scrubbies to do this. We're all familiar with Scrubbies. I'm just clicking up here and you see how the hand goes to the little arrows. I just click and hold and I'm just moving my mouse left and right. And it's filling in that number. A real quick way to do that. Well, in this case, what if these were two photographs? What if these were two prints? And what if I could take a pair of scissors and cut a hole out in the top one over here? And if I were to put that print that's got the hole cut in it and overlay it over this one, you could see this car, couldn't you? You see, if I take two photos and stack them, that's layers, isn't it? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a hole in one, namely in the top one. And how I do that is coming down here to this little function called Layer Mask. If I click on Layer Mask, I get this little box over here. And what this is the mask. Now I'm going to come take a brush and I'm going to paint on this mask right in here. And look at what happens. Let's get the whole shadow in there, shall we? All right. So now what I've done is I've poked a hole in the top one, and then I just put this one under it. And now I've got both of the vehicles there, and that's what a layer mask can do for you. Now, if we just go look at the mask alone, this is what the mask looks like. So everything that's black is going to be transparent, or how shall I say, it will reveal what's underneath. Everything that's white is going to conceal what's underneath. So again, black is going to be transparent. It's going to reveal what's underneath. And when we go look at this, it sure does. And again, there it is. There's the hole. Anytime you see checkerboard like this, that means that it's transparent. Think of a picture frame that doesn't even have glass in it. That's how transparent it is. And so here's the background that I've just put in. And I could put in any other background if I wanted, but just in this case, just to show you how I got the two vehicles going together on the road, that's a way that we can do that. So let's talk about text layers. And I'll add text to this particular composition. I'm going to just hit the T key for type. And let's just go look at fonts. And which font would I like? By the way, if your fonts don't look this big, we can fix that. This one might be a nice one. Okay, so you see how big these fonts are? When you click on fonts, if they're not this big, and if you're having a hard time trying to see them, here's what I want you to do. Go over here to type, and then come down to font preview size, and go to huge. Seriously, go to huge. And what this is going to do is that's going to give you the ability to better see what these fonts look like. Now, I'm going to want to type in, let's go with white. I like to use the web-only colors. That's a quick way to get to white. And then I need to figure out what I want to type. And maybe I'll just title this RGING CARs on a road. OAD. I can spell. There we go. Merging cars on a road. Now, I can click underneath and move this to wherever I'd like to put it. I like that. And what if I'd like to change the size of this? If I just wipe over this. Again, this is where scrubbies are great. See how this cursor goes to a scrubby? Okay, that's at 75 point. I'm not even going to look at that. I'm just going to move the mouse to the right, and then I'm going to come here underneath and just move this right in here. And I'll say OK to that. Now, I have a text layer that I can turn on and off. Right there. I could take that car away, or I could do this and have a hole. But now you see I've got 3 layers over here. And you'll notice that the text layer is on the top. If I put this text layer down the bottom, it goes away. Let's do that one more time. There we go. See, we can't see it. Does that mean that the layer's not there? Oh, it's there. If I shut this one off and if I shut this one off, there it is. So that's why, again, layers are hierarchical. I get the question every time I do one of these classes where somebody will come to me and say, I've got all these layers and I can only see the top one. Well, that's good. It's working the way it should. Have a nice day.
Why is the text layer with the mask? I thought the mask was with the
Yeah, it is. There we go. You can move the mask layer around too.
I didn't know that. I learned something. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, when I moved it, unfortunately, I didn't quite get it right. Now, we can also have a little more fun with this, and this is something I'd want you to explore if you hit the FX. This is where we can come in here and say, well, let's put a stroke around this, and it might be nice if the stroke was a different color, so let's just make that black. And if I say on the outside of the letters, and if I bring this up, see what I've just done? I've just put a stroke around the letters, so now it looks a little nicer. And I could even put a drop shadow out there if I wanted. And with the drop shadow, what I would do is to figure out the distance, the spread, the size. So I can make that a little bit softer. I can change the opacity just to make that look like a stain. And here's something kind of fun. By the way, if you don't like where that drop shadow is, just come down here and click on it, and you can move it anywhere you want. All right. So there is drop shadow, and we can back that off just a little bit. There we go. So there's merging cars on a road with a stroke around the letters and also with a drop shadow. And this shows me right here, here are the effects. Here's what it looks like with just the drop shadow. Here's what it looks like with just the stroke. And there's stroke and drop shadow. So we can put effects into certain layers. And this can be really good because let's say if you're making a poster and you need to make text stand out. Have you ever seen a poster where somebody's put text up over a picture, but it kind of blends in with the sky? Well, that's where you need to do a little bit of treatment to put a drop shadow in and put in a stroke, and that can make the text a lot more legible. So let's talk about some adjustments that we can do using layers. So I'm going to work with this image. This is a raw file. Let's just see what auto does immediately. Yeah, that kind of did some nice things. And I think I'll just do a real quick processing job here. There we go. And maybe I'll straighten the horizon if I just double click. And that's good enough. So I'm going to open this file. So I've just opened this file into Photoshop. So what I'm going to do now is, you notice this is a background layer. Now here's something we need to know about. Every time we open up a file, it's always going to be some form of a layer. In this case, it's a background layer. Now, I can't do a whole lot with this other than to put layers on top of it, which is okay. But if I wanted to put something under this, I would have to double click on this, and when I do that, it becomes layer 0. Now, when it's a background, think of that as being the lowest layer in your house, like the basement. It can't go any lower. Now, the moment I make that layer 0, now you could put a floor under it, as many as you want. Now, in this case, I would like to duplicate this layer, and a quick way to do that for a shortcut is to Control and then J. Think of it as jumping. So Control J gives me this secondary copy. Now, I can come up here and say multiply. You see how dark that is? What that is like is having two 35mm slides and put one on top of the other. Where the scene is light, it's going to be very light. Where the scene is dark, it's going to be very dark. Now remember how I said I can now cut a hole, and if I were to come up here and draw a box like this, and if I were to fill that box with black, remember black is going to make this so that's transparent. I'll say okay. That's like just cutting a hole in these two pictures so you can see one right through the other. Now what I'm going to do is on this layer here, which is the mask, what if I were to blur this? Because that's a pretty hard edge. So if I were to click on the mask, you see how you have to do this, by the way? If I click over here, that's the image. If I click over here, that's the mask. And now I'll just go up to Filter, I'll go to Blur, and I'll go to Gaussian Blur, and now I can adjust this however I want, and look at what's happening to that edge. See how that's getting really soft now? And I'll just say OK to that. There's one way to do edge darkening. Now I can take the opacity and blend this back and get it to just wherever I want that to be. Now the nice thing about doing this is I can put this mask anywhere I want. I could have put it around the boat. I could have done it just in the sky. And if we turn this on and off, you'll see that I'm definitely darkening the edges. So that's a cool way to do edge darkening and to have control over it, because normally it's just going to, by default, do the edges. But in this case, yeah, I did the edges, but you could do more if you wanted. Let me show you something else that we can do. I'm going to get rid of this mask, delete the layer mask, and I'm just going to go back here to normal. Now, if I were to take this top layer and blur it, so I'm going to go to Filter, go back to Blur, Gaussian Blur, and maybe not that much, but I'm going to bring this down so that it's definitely a little bit blurry, like that. All right, and I'll say OK. Now, this is what it looks like. We just blurred it. But if I take this opacity and back it off, you see now we're looking at the bottom layer, which is tack sharp, Here's the top layer all blurry. I can move this somewhere into the middle and make this look kind of dreamy. See? That's what I call the Hallmark card effect. When you're trying to make something look kind of dreamy, this might make for a really nice cover of something. And of course, you could put text up here, and the text would look really sharp over this. So this is just another thing we can do with layers, right? And don't write these numbers down. That's 51%. But again, I use Scrubbies just to move this back and forth. I'm not looking at the numbers. And I just pick, all right, what degree of softness do I want? Right there. Now, here's something else we can do. Again, courtesy of layers. I could apply a filter. Now, some people look at me and they say, what's your favorite filter in Topaz Adjust? And one of my favorite filters is called psychedelic. And you're going to say, what the heck are you thinking? Here's psychedelic. I can look at some of the others, see if there's something, oh, that was not bad, vivacious. That's pretty good too. Oh, I like Spicify. And HDR Sketch is pretty good too. See, I'm just stepping through. This is a program that unfortunately has been discontinued, but you can still find it out there. And so I'll go with psychedelic. All right, now you're going to look at that and say, whoa, that's just way too much. And I'll say, okay to this. I'm going to go ahead and apply this. But remember, I did this on a layer. So watch what happens when I blend this back. Now, here is that top layer with that filter at 100%. And here's that bottom layer with a zero filter. So watch what happens when I take the opacity and move this back. In fact, I'll go all the way back to 0. Now I'm just going to bring this up a little. Is that not making the water and the sky pop a little bit? Only at 35%. Now watch the before and after. Here's before, there's after. Isn't that a little more interesting? Some of those filters that you might just discount, you look at them and you say, oh, God, I'd never use that. Yeah, you might. Who knew that I'd ever use psychedelic? But I use that actually quite a bit when I'm working with images, just to make them pop in a way that you wouldn't normally be able to do that. Now I'm going to try and put some images onto a background, and I'm going to say New. I'm going to shut off artboards. I'm going to choose 4x6, and I think I'll go with a white background, and this is 4 inches by 6 inches at 300 dpi, sRGB. We'll say create. So there's my canvas. Now I'm going to put an image onto the canvas. So I'm just going to jump over here to Bridge, and I'm going to look for an image that I think might look nice in there. So I'll choose this image to put onto the canvas. So I'm opening that up. Now what I'm going to do is you'll notice across the top here in Photoshop, here is that blank canvas. Here is this image that I just opened up. I'm going to undock this just by clicking and holding and dragging it down. Then I'm going to take this background and drag this right over and on top. And then I'm just going to get rid of this. I don't need this. Now that's pretty big. I'm going to right click and say free transform. I'm just going to zoom out to find where the edges are. And I'm just going to bring this down to make this much smaller and put this right here onto my canvas. So I just moved that around. I did that pretty quickly. But I think I'm going to put this one down here, and you'll see why in just a moment. So there is that picture put onto this background. And if we look at the layers, you see, here's this photo, and here is the background. Let's do that again, but I'd like to put another photo up here in this corner. So I'm going to go back to Bridge, and I'm going to look for another image that I think might look nice up there. Maybe another sunset, shall we? So I'll open this one. This is a raw file. Now one thing I'm going to do that's going to make things a little bit simpler, since my canvas here is only 4x6, I'm going to resize this on the way and say on the long side, let's make it 5. And I'll make it probably even smaller. And I need to change this to sRGB because that's my color space. And then I'll just say open. I'm not going to bother processing that. So when I open that, this is going to go full screen, and there it is. Now what I'm going to do is just to undock this, just like I did before, move this out of the way, take the background and drag it over here to the canvas. Now I'm going to get rid of this because I'm done with that. I don't want to save the changes. If I right click, this is where I can do the free transform, and I can move this around to wherever I might want to place this. And if I put it here, you can see what I've just done is I've just merged two images onto one canvas. And I could change the order of these if I wanted. If I took this bottom image and put it on top, look at what happens. It cuts into the top one. Or I can leave it down and the top one is over this one. You see, if you look at this image really is on top of this one, and ultimately this is on top of the background. Now here's something we can do. If we go to this little positioning move tool, if I just right click here, you see, here's layer 2, and that's on the background. If I click here, that's layer 1 on the background. Look at what happens when I click in the middle. That's layer 2 that's on top of layer 1 that's on the background. Because you see, this image is over that image, and this is the one area where they are stepping on one another, if you will. This one's stepping on that one. Now, if I'm happy with that composition, what I can do is to save this. And I would like to save this so that I can edit these layers later. So here's an important factor. If I go here to File, and if I come down here to Save As, I'm going to give this a title. I'll just call this FNPS demo. And it's important that I save it as a Photoshop file, because when I do that, it's going to save the layers. So I can reopen this, and I can go move those layers around, add to them, delete whatever I might want later. I'm not committing to anything. Now, if I were to go and save this as a JPEG, on the other hand, I don't get to save layers, and this is as good as publishing it. And this will flatten the image. And once it's flat, you no longer have the editing capabilities to be able to go and move those layers around, or change things. Really important if you have text layers, because let's say if you misspelled something, and if you flatten it, you're going to have to go and recreate the whole poster from scratch. So this is where I always highly recommend, it's the top option here, and choose Photoshop. So this is why we want to save things as a Photoshop file or a PSD file. And I'll just do it. I'll save this, and now I can come back and open this file. Now, if I wanted to send this off to Walmart or Walgreens, they're not going to know what to do with a layered file. This is where we would then have to make a JPEG. And we have a couple of choices. We can go to Layer and say flatten the image. And if I do that, watch what happens to the layers over on the far right there. It just goes to this one background. That's all we get. And now, if I wanted to edit this, I'm stuck, because this is now etched in stone, or etched in Photoshop. We're going to revisit these cars again, and I'm going to draw on the mask and reveal this other vehicle like we did before. Okay? Now, what if I made a mistake and I needed to fix something? Like, oops. Well, the good news is, if you just hit the letter X, this exchanges the black and the white. Now I can come in here and just fill that back in. Anytime I'm doing any kind of editing like this, I almost keep one finger on the X key, because this is where I can just hit X and let's just get rid of some of that shadow. I'll hit X and say, well, let's bring some back in. Over here, same thing. Take some out, hit the X key, put some back in. And all we're doing is, if you look at this, at one point I'm drawing in black, and then the next time I'm drawing in white. That's all we're doing. This is what the whole looks like. Like that. So far we've just been talking about black and white. What if I were to draw on this mask in gray? So let's just go look at the mask here for a moment. And what if I did gray? Now we have a translucent car. And the shade of the gray is going to dictate how much of this is visible. So you see, I can just paint this whole thing and make that all pretty gray. Or I could go back to the default, which would be black, and now I can paint and have that whole thing entirely visible. All right, let me show you one more thing that we can do with layers, which is kind of fun. So let's open this image, and I'm going to show you a utility purpose for layers. I'm going to take this image and do a Control J. Now, in this first image, I'm going to go do a Control L, which is levels, and I'm going to just lighten this all up a little bit. Now I'm going to go to the second image, do a Control L, and I'm going to darken this a bit. Now, one is clearly brighter than the other. Have you ever had a situation where you make a print and the print doesn't come out quite the way you remember seeing it on the screen? What if we were to do what they used to call a clip test? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to draw what we call a gradient pattern, and I just need to have the basics. That will be black to white. And if I were to start here at the top and drag this all the way down here to the bottom, now I've got this gradient mask that you can see what's happening. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this mask and I'm going to posterize it. Now what that means is I'm going to take the image and go into adjustments, and I'm going to go to posterize, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come out with like maybe 6, 7 levels. I'll do, can I get to 8? 7 will do. Okay, so remember how black is going to be totally see-through, white's going to be totally concealed, but these will be different steps. So now when I apply that and look at this, we can see those bars now, can't we? So this up here we know is totally black, and down here in the bottom we know is totally white. Now we could go and print this image just the way it is. And then we could look at that print and say, which of these tonalities do we like the most? And let's say if it's this one right here, well, I can count 1, 2, 3. Well, if I come over here and look at this, 1, 2, 3, well, it's this one. Now all I have to do is take that one tonality and fill with that color. There we go. That was that shade of gray. And then when I come back and look at the image, you see the difference between that and this. Now I go and make that print, and that will come out looking the way that you remembered seeing it on that clip test. So you might make 2 prints, but if you are making more than 2 prints to get one that's satisfactory, I submit your color calibrations off on your monitor, and you may not be using the right profile for your printer, But here's a quick way to be able to go in and just in two prints get something that looks really pretty good. So let's say if we wanted to do the gradient in a different direction, I could just go across like this. And now if I come over here and choose that, go to Image, Adjustments, Posterize, and maybe I'll do, say, 7 levels just for the heck of it. We'll say OK. You print this, look at the print and say, gee, I really like the tonality of this shade right here. Well, this is where you have to count. 1, 2, 3. Or maybe if you like the fourth one over, 4. Okay, so a little manual counting there. But then we're going to go to Alt and click here, and we do the same count. 1, 2, 3, 4. If I were to grab this, 1, 2, 3, 4, click here. Now I'll say OK. I just go over this, hit fill, the foreground color, and now I got it. So there's a quick look at layers. Thanks for watching.